Astaghfirullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Knowledge is rizq. If Allah decreed for them,
There you go. So let's actually go back and to the ayat, and we were laying out وإن أردتم استبدال زوج مكان زوج وآتيتم إحداهن قنطارا. So we basically, okay, now this, I hope this doesn't keep on playing games with me. All right. So it was basically talking about, of course, the idea before, talking about getting married, the woman, of course, giving the woman the right to choose her husband, and of course, in order to ban the previous ideas that a woman was property, and therefore laid out what a woman's rights are in terms of getting married to somebody else, in terms of having the right to choose her husband, and certainly the right to have her ideas and of course her voice to be heard, or at least her voice rather than just say ideas. Okay, so having that being said, in the ayat we're laying out, well, what does an alternate marriage look like? What does another husband look like? Who can a person choose the future wife from? So therefore it basically laid out, number one, laid out that the man should not whatsoever abuse that there was any form of a dispute in any way and try to create a narrative to give himself the justification to take a woman's mahar. So that's why that ayah was laying it out, that not only is she not a property, but even her property, you do not have the right to abuse or create a narrative to take her property. And of course, then we talked about the different women that a man is not allowed to get married to, and we talked about one, the man, and or actually manakaha aba'ukum, so basically their fathers, and we said that the father would mean the father, the grandfather, the great grandfather, so whoever your father or great grandfather, etc., speaking to the man, whoever your father had been intimate or got or had any marriage relationships with, then in that situation he cannot get married to them. And we talked about this one because this was a behavior that the
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Okay, so here, why did they remove my post? I assume they removed one of my posts because it supported Palestine. So they are removing a lot of posts because certain things are supporting Palestine. So here we go. They removed one of the posts because I'm sure because it supported Palestine. But yeah, this is not a surprise. All right. حرمت عليكم أمهاتكم, and then the ayah, of course, this is Surah Nisa. Then it lists all the different women. We said there are three different types of women that the ayah was listing. Number one, the biological women. Number two, The women that are certain in-laws, in other words, through a marriage relationship. And number three, through what is called al-jama'. Al-jama' to mean combining two women in one marriage. And for the first one, which is the biological women, whether it's the mother of a person, in other words, the biological mother, or even if we're talking about a grandmother or a great grandmother, therefore a man cannot marry any woman that was considered as one of the women that had bore him. All right. Number two is that the daughters. So basically, whether it's a daughter, a great granddaughter, etc. So all the daughters he could not get married to. Number three, the sisters. And we talked about the sisters, whether we're talking about half sister, a sister through the dad's side, a sister through the mother's side, or a sister that is shaqiqa. A shaqiqa would basically be a sister that you share mother and father with. So it would be different than a sister through the mom's side or a sister through the dad's side. Ammatukum, the aunt, basically the paternal aunt. The paternal aunt, which basically would be your dad's sister, and whether we're talking about your dad's sister, whether it's a full sister, which is a shaqiqa, or whether it's half a sister. In other words, at the end of the day, that's the dad's sister, whether it's half sister or full sister. Khalatukum, the mother's aunts, whether it's the full aunt to mean shaqiqa, but share if your mom shares a mother and a father with a person with basically shares a mom, so it's a full sibling, or whether it's half a sibling, that would still be a khala, the mother's sisters. وبنات الأخ. Banatul akh would be the nieces, but the brother's daughters or the sister's daughters. Now, the second type is basically through الرضاعة, through rada', which basically is through nursing. So whether, and we said that the general default ruling is يحرم من الرضاع ما يحرم من النسب. يحرم من الرضاع ما يحرم من النسب. The same relations that makes biological relations haram or halal would basically be the same ruling would apply to nursing as well. So whether that was the woman that nursed or whether he had sisters through nursing, in other words, she shared the same mother that nursed this person, then in that situation, that would be his sister through nursing. And of course, ummahatu nisaikum. Now, of course, when we look at this ayah, definitely this ayah is not giving me all the different categories of who is haram to get married to through nursing, and that was actually listed in the ahadith. So the ahadith were giving me a general rule, يحرم من الرضاع ما يحرم من النسب, that whatever the biological relations would consider as haram, so whether we're talking about a mother, we're talking about a daughter through nursing, or even siblings through nursing, or whether it was an aunt or a paternal aunt or a maternal aunt through nursing, or whether it's a nephew or a niece through nursing, whether it's the sister's daughter through nursing, at the end of the day is that they would all be considered as a mahram. Now, one thing we also mentioned, we mentioned that there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ even when Sayyidah Aysha was talking about her uncle visiting her, and she had mentioned that she wanted to get the Prophet ﷺ's permission whether this person can actually visit her or not. And she had nursed from the woman that was married to this man. So the Prophet ﷺ told her, well, he would be your uncle from Rida. So in other words, and she was surprised. It's like, well, the woman was the one that nursed me, not this guy. And the Prophet ﷺ responded to her, well, he was the reason why she got the milk from the first place, which is an indication, a very interesting indication, that when a woman is married to a man, that there is more that happens to a woman's body than, let's call it, the biological area. or let me call it the genetic area, or the area, let's call it the reproductive system. That, are you with me? So this is an indication in Islam from this hadith that when a woman is married to a man, just as the milk probably is induced through this marriage that this man had resulted, yes, probably in a pregnancy to happen that later formed a result of pregnancy. But according to this hadith, that there's actually more than just an effect on the reproductive system, or even, let's call it the lactation and in the body, but there's actually more. If you actually look into the ayat or into the hadith, where the ayat, whether we're talking about the iddah, or even we're talking about the change in iddah during a widow, etc., these are different indications that a woman's body in a marriage, and when there is a relationship, that a woman's body gets impacted more than just a reproductive system changing, or at least having a connection, that it actually goes farther, that it's affecting psychology, it's probably affecting neurological change, or probably even affecting things in probably the DNA itself, even though it's, who knows, maybe they could do more studies to actually see that. But you could see that the hadith and the ayat are definitely indicating that there is more, more of a change than just an issue of lactation. All right. Let's continue right there. وأمهات نسائكم وربائبكم التي في حجوركم. We talked about the relationship through al-musahara. What is al-musahara? Al-musahara is basically through marriage. So through marriage, when a marriage does happen, the mother-in-law, and we talked about when the mother-in-law becomes haram on the man to get married to. And we said that that would be even if a marriage contract were to happen between him and a woman, her mother automatically, just by the marriage contract, she becomes haram on him. In other words, a mahram. But we did say that if he were to have a marriage contract with the mother, the daughter would not be a mahram to him unless there was intimacy involved. We talked about that. Right? We went in detail about that last time. فإن لم تكونوا دخلتم بهن فلا جناح عليكم. We talked about وحلائل أبنائكم, and the wives of your sons, your sons' wives, basically daughter-in-law, الذين من أصلابكم, those that were by your biological sons. In other words, if we were talking about an adopted son, his wife is not a mahram on the let me say the father that adopted that son. So this is talking about الذين من أصلابكم, meaning really your biological sons, not adopted sons, or not other or even الذين من أصلابكم. In other words, can a man marry his uncle's wife? Oh, yes, he can. Yes, he can, because he's not
Biological.
he's not his biological dad. Got it? It can happen. My uncles are my age. My uncles are actually my age. In fact, I'm older than some of my uncles and some of my aunts.
But they're
Yeah, we're Palestinian. Yeah, we kind of work differently. All right. Yeah, I've got some uncles and some aunts that are actually younger than me. My grandfather, both sides, were actually married to 4, and some of them were married to 6. Of course, not in the same marriage. Yep. And one had, I believe, 23, and the other one had 15. Yeah. Yes. We actually, yeah, we're, yeah. No, several.
Oh, okay.
Several. But it's not strange that we would actually have one woman actually have these numbers. It's rare. to have 23, but yeah, it can happen. Okay. وأن تجمعوا بين الأختين. أن تجمعوا بين الأختين, that's basically الجمع. So now we're talking about المحرمات. 1. بالنسب. 2. الرضاع. 3. المصاهرة. 4. الجمع. Do it again. النسب, biological. 2.
I have 8.
الرضاع. No, we're here just talking about the categories.
Okay.
So the first one is biological. Number 2 is الرضاع, nursing. Number 3, al-musahara, through marriage relations. Number 4, al-jam', basically combining between different women in one marriage. So a woman and her aunt, a woman and her maternal aunt or paternal aunt, and a woman and her sister. They cannot be co-wives. Why? Why can't they be co-wives?
They're very close. That's very bad to fight.
That's going to definitely. Well, what do we learn from that? What we learn from it, the Prophet ﷺ gave al-illah, the reason to it, and why it wasn't something that the Prophet ﷺ recommended. And he said, if you were to do that, you are going to basically going to create the loss in family ties. What does that mean? That actually tells you that the relationship between co-wives, it is, I don't want to say inevitable, but it is very likely to happen that there would be tensions. And the last thing you want to create is a tension between a girl and her sister. You don't want to create these types of tensions. So from the very start, don't even put them in a shared property that is being co-wives from the very start of it, right?
Yes.
From the very start of it. And that's also what we take of it, in where we talked about this before, but if we have co-wives, don't be too utopian and think that somehow, we can have them be sister wives and etc. Don't be too utopian. There's a reality. Let each one feel that she's completely independent. Don't bring up this woman and talk about her co-wife. And that's a mistake that we talked about a lot of men would do, that they would think that they're going to be solving the problem, but what they're really doing is putting water over the mud. It's going to just get it even more muddy. All right. وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. Now this is to continue. So whenever you would have this wa, that would actually mean harf atf. What is harf atf? It's basically putting in an addition. What is it adding to? It's basically adding to the rest of the list that was mentioned earlier. Adding وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. المحصنات. What is المحصن? المحصن, the root comes from ha sa na. The root ha sa na actually means to fortify. Fortify? What does that mean? That's why you would talk about al-hisn. Al-hisn is a fortress. Why is it called a fortress? Because it's fortified with power to give security, to give protection, and all of that. So al-muhsanat min al-nisa basically means the women that are fortified with power, or the women, but this is a metaphor. This is not talking about women fortified with power to somehow be a ninja, okay? This is not talking about that. But this is actually, this is a metaphor to mean, in Lugha Arabiya, to refer to, one, the women that are married, two, the women that are bashful. Pay attention. Now, the bashful women, and two, the married women. But certainly, this is not talking about the bashful women, because a man is supposed to marry a bashful woman. This is actually talking about women that are in a marriage bond. In other words, a man cannot marry a woman that is already married. That's a no, right? Did they even use, why did the ayat even need to say that? Because it was common during the Arab, during the Jahiliyyah, during the pre-prophetic times is that they did actually have different kinds of marriages. A woman would be married, but because a woman's husband probably needed a child of certain qualities, he would basically go tell his wife to go sleep with another man that he chooses because he wanted a child of certain qualities. This is really strange, but believe it or not, during the pre-prophetic Jahiliyyah time, they actually used to practice these kinds of marriages, and the child would be attributed to the actual husband. So he would basically tell his wife, hey, that man, he seems tall, he seems handsome. Definitely, we want a child with those qualities. Go and sleep with that man. Exactly. Everybody's giving me like, would they even do? Yes, they did that. That's part of Jahiliyyah. And the Sayyidah Aysha even explained that that's how part of the practice was actually like during Jahiliyyah. Go ahead, my dear.
And the child would still belong to her.
Yes, the child would still belong to her husband. Yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. Exactly. Yes, they practice that. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was, let's say, redefining and bringing in a complete redefinition of what marriage is, what relationships should look like, etc. Because the Arab were really, let's call it primitive in their understanding. And which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even chose the Sharia of Islam to be on these people, because it was,
We had everything great.
they had well, believe it or not, other places even had crazier things, but the Arab were, let's say, a tablet that was ready to be rewritten and to write on it and to make a fresh start.
So they had good
They
parts.
did actually have a lot of good things, even though, in fact, the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith that إنما جئت لأتمم مكارم الأخلاق. He said, I had only come in order to complete the best of the akhlaq. In other words, the Arab did have akhlaq. They did have a lot of great values before Islam even. So they considered, you would know, and you're capable of studying the akhlaq that the Arab had through their poetry. And there were poetry that was actually hung in the Kaaba. They were called al-mu'allaqat. They were hung in the Kaaba, believe it or not, hung in the Kaaba. Why? It was like the constitution that they had seen the world through. And these mu'allaqat are actually there during our times until now. They're actually published until now. They would get PhDs on the mu'allaqat, very eloquent. It's extremely even hard to read. All right. Now, but those mu'allaqat are considered references in learning Arabic. They are considered references that we can go back to learn about what the pre-prophetic era actually looked like in terms of ideas, in terms of religious practices, in terms of culture, in terms of morality, ethics, the list goes on and on. The mu'allaqat, and we're talking about every mu'allaqa, some of them would have 75 lines, so they would be 75, what are those called? 75 lines of poetry, some of them 150, some of them 300. So you would, what do they call
The different sections, like
stanzas? Yeah, well, stanzas, but they're, yeah, you can call it a stanza. Right, that's what it is. All right, so وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ, المحصنات here, and this is important to look at. In other words, when a woman is married, they're actually supposed to be muhsana. When you're married, you're supposed to be muhsana. You're supposed to be completely protected, that you're preserving yourself for your husband only. Preserving your husband for your husband, preserving yourself for your husband. إلا ما ملكت أيمانكم. What is ملك اليمين? ملكت أيمانكم. ملك اليمين. ملك اليمين. The word milk actually means to own. اليمين means right hand, but this is not talking about what your right hand possesses. This is not talking about what your right hand has. This is a metaphor to actually mean the concubines. We did talk about the concubines, and we did talk about slavery in detail. We're not going to go back to it, but just to make the story short, that Islam does consider that it is permissible only for the owner, that is the man owner, to actually have relations with his concubine. Now keep that in mind. So it's not for the whole family to share, only the one that owns.
Up to today?
What was that?
Up to today?
There is no slavery today, and definitely we should not revive such a thing, because even when you look at the ahadith and the ayat, min maqasid al-sharia, the maqasid al-sharia, the legal maxims, are definitely, we're definitely laying out the different, let's call them different standards in order to end such a practice. The only reason why Islam had permitted such a practice in the early times of Islam was really because it was practiced on the Muslims. So to revive it in any way is not at all bringing in any maslaha. What is al-maslaha? Al-maslaha is basically any benefit. There's no benefit to bringing such a practice, because we definitely don't want such a practice to happen onto the Muslim women either. There's no maslaha. In fact, Islam was laying out structures in order to end such a practice.
The woman is allowed to marry the slave girl, so she has her rights.
Even if he marries her, she has rights. Even if she were to be a slave woman. Well, here's a question. Does Islam actually recommend that? We're going to get to it, because that's what that ayah is really focusing on. Islam doesn't actually recommending being intimate with the slave women. Where and how do we find that? This is the ayah where it emphasizes that Islam does not recommend having any intimacy with the slave women, whether they are Muslim or Christian or Jew. Why? Let's see. That's why وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. So the exception is that, number one, that muhsanatu min al-nisa, that the man is basically right there. He's not allowed to marry a woman that is already married or is already owned by another master without the consent. Got it? Kitab Allahi alaykum. When you say Kitab Allahi, this is basically to emphasize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid out the structure and the regulations of marriage and how, where, and how it's supposed to happen as a Kitab Allah. The word Kitab Allah to mean a book, but this is not to mean a book, but this is to mean that this is a structure that the Lord Almighty had decreed upon you. In other words, it's a structure that you are supposed to embrace and follow by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, when we're talking about marriage, this is not an issue of what your definition of marriage and love and relationship in creating a narrative. It's not a narrative here, but it's basically a decree by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a decree by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not a narrative that you create. وأحل لكم ما وراء ذلكم. In other words, أحل لكم, and it was permitted. I'm going to first translate this one. I would say surface translation. And it was permitted upon you what is beyond that you would seek with your wealth محصنين غير مسافحين, in marriage and not outside of marriage in prostitution. فما استمتعتم به منهن فآتوهن أجورهن فريضة. And what you had been intimate with them in, then give them أجورهن, give them the compensation for it as an obligation. And it would not be a sin upon you if you were to accept that after al-farida, after the obligation. This is a wrong translation, everybody. We're just giving you what that would look like in interlinear. The Lord Almighty is all-knowing and all-wise. A very horrible translation, but this is what would look like if you were to actually not be, even if somebody is actually Arabi background, most of this they would not understand it. Even if somebody spoke some Arabi, they would only understand probably 20% of it. All right, everybody, this is a horrible translation. I'm just going to tell you what it might sound for a person that doesn't really go deep in it. So let me explain this one. It is permitted for you to go, what is beyond that? What is beyond what? What is beyond all these women that were mentioned before, not to get married to, and including the women that are married, and including the bondswomen, in other words, the concubines. But is that necessarily only it? أُحِلَّ لَكُم مَا وَرَاءَ ذَلِكُمْ. Let's go back to the ayah in Surah. In Surah سأل سائل بعذاب واقع. Let's go back to the ayah. The ayah was saying what? وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين فمن ابتغى وراء ذلك فأولئك هم العادون. We cannot understand that ayah or this ayah without connecting them to each other. Why? Because when you want to do tafsir, you have to do tafsir in the lines of one, other ayat, two, through the lens of sunnah, three, through the lens of lugha arabiya. Got it? You got three things. Now, if you look at what أُحِلَّ لَكُم مَا وَرَاءَ ذَلِكُم, that would actually mean that all is permissible as long as you don't marry any of these women that were mentioned earlier, that it actually is permissible to do beyond that. And تبتغوا, on a condition that you would seek with your money marriage and not in prostitution. So what was that actually saying? What about things like masturbation? Is that at all permissible? What about maybe other relations? Is that at all permissible? Now, the ayat were really clear in emphasizing, whether we're talking about the ayat in relationship to Prophet Lut alayhi salam, in emphasizing that any type of a relation, if we're talking about same sex, is actually not permissible. We talked about that. Now, the other part, what about things like masturbation? Is that permissible? Majority of the scholars had actually regarded that it is not permissible based on the ayah in Surah At-Taghabun. Surah سأل سائل بعذاب واقع. Regarded that the ayah And what it was saying, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ, and for those that would guard their private parts, إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ, except upon their spouses, أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُم, or the concubines, their concubines, فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ. فَمَنِ ابْتَغَى, and whoever seeks any outside, that is basically sexual desire, any other exit, any other way, فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ, that would mean that they had transgressed the limit, regarded that the limit is basically to be within a marriage bond or with the concubines. Now, the only madhab that regarded that it would be permissible in situations where, well, let me correct that and modify the word, not permissible per se, but they regarded that it would be the lesser evil in situations where there is fitna and marriage is not accessible. So this girl or this man is trying to get married, but they're either not getting the right candidate or they don't have the money to get married if it's a man. In that situation, and of course, milk al-yamin is not available. In that situation, for the madhab Hanbali, they regarded things like masturbation. They regarded that it would be in that situation not necessarily halal per se, but they regarded that it would be a lesser evil than falling in zina, which is a considerable opinion, especially at the times when we're seeing all the fitna really surrounding our young men and women, and marriage is really hard to find. So this is just an opinion to lay out there. But of course, for a person, in order to say, well, in this situation, I'm taking this opinion, we would basically have to say that in situation where you are in such strong desire, you do have to consider marriage seriously. You would have to consider marriage seriously and look into the candidates and be available for marriage. Now, marriage in general falls in the categories where it can be obligatory, it can be sunnah, it can be mubah, it can be makruh, and it can be haram. Let's lay those out, because those are all usuli terminologies that sometimes it's hard to understand. Okay, we're going to lay out those terminologies because it's a very important issue to understand how we put in these ideas and apply them in a way for us to understand. Okay, let's do it. Now, when we're looking at it, let's look at it right there. Okay, I didn't write this. This is my daughter. I'm going to open this. Here we go. Now, for marriage, it can be. The first one is going to be what? It's going to be fard, obligatory. When would it be obligatory? It would be obligatory when you have strong desire and you fear haram. Got it? That's number one. Number two, it would be the opposite. So we're looking at haram, which would mean it would be prohibited if you basically, so when you don't have desire and you fear oppressing your spouse. Okay, so in that situation, you would basically be, we'll say, it's haram for you to get married. Like what? How does it that I don't have strong desire? Okay, yeah, you don't have desire. Or you might have desire, but you, in that situation, fear that you might abuse your spouse or maybe abuse your children. In other words, you cannot, let's put it that way, cannot be committed if you know
Not be committed to justice.
cannot be committed to basically fulfilling the marriage responsibilities. So you can't be committed to fulfilling, all right, the marriage responsibilities, fulfilling marriage rights. In that situation, it would be haram on you. Now, it can also be mubah. What is mubah? Mubah is optional. You don't have strong desire, and it's out there. Yeah, it would be nice to have a companion, but I don't really have a strong desire. And yeah, I'm neutral. I can take care of a family. I've got the personality. That situation would be mubah. Okay. Now, sunnah would be recommended in where the person, that situation, they basically neutral, or let's say they've got the desire, but it's not to the level of strong desire where they're fearing zina. The desire is there, and they basically don't fear oppressing or even not being committed to the marriage responsibilities. Okay, so not being or not afraid, so don't fear or not being committed to the marriage rights and responsibilities, whether we're talking about the husband or whether we're talking about the children. The other part is makruh. Okay, makruh basically means hated. When we're talking about hated, there are two types according to the Hanafi. There's something called karaha tahrimiyya and karaha tanzihiyya. We're not going to get into that. But makruh would be when there is a desire. Okay, so there is desire, and the desire is strong, but at the same time, you do fear that you might oppress the husband or the children, not give them their rights. So let's say you fear oppressing let's say the marriage. Let's just leave it at that. Now, one thing, let me modify the haram part. It's not that you fear, but you basically know that you will be oppressing your spouse or your children.
Like I won't be there for 10 years.
You will know that, hey, I've got a temper issue. I've got a temper issue. And I know that once I have a temper issue, that my husband, I don't know how to stay compromising in any way. I've got a temper issue. I've got a problem. I've got a temper issue. I've got maybe bipolar. I know that the kids are going to be in that situation. They're going to be abused because I've got a problem, for example. Okay. So in that situation, when you look at these ones, that's going to really be different from one person to another. But the question is, what are the marriage rights that I'm supposed to be fulfilling? Right? What are the marriage rights that I'm supposed to be fulfilling? Number one, D-N-A-I-M. You want to fulfill, number one, the deen for the marriage. Deen for the marriage, basically your deen and the children's deen. Number two, their health. We're looking at their health, their life. Are you going to be able to actually take care of that? Number three, we're looking at their mental health. When we're looking at mental health, are you going to be capable of actually making sure that everybody is mentally healthy and you're not there abusing the children or abusing the spouse? Number four, when we're talking about chastity, can you stop them from playing with the ball, Zemzem, or tell them to play in the other room? The number four, it's basically chastity. When you're looking at chastity, are you going to be able to fulfill the husband's chastity? Are you going to be able to fulfill your chastity? And of course, there are different things that would basically get into the way. Get an OB and get screened before you even get into a marriage that you cannot be in. Get screened. Same thing. If it's a man, get screened and make sure that you're actually healthy. If there's an STD, make sure that you tell the other person about your STD. Get screened before getting married. Make sure that there's nothing that is going to be probably objecting in any way or interfering in a healthy sexual relationship. Number five, the finance part. Do you have an issue of probably lacking money management? if it's a man or if it's a woman, etc. So then we would basically have to clear that. Now, to go back to the ayah, when you look at right there, وَأُحِلَّ لَكُمْ مَا وَرَاءَ ذَلِكُمْ, this is not to say everything is permitted, but this is to say that any relationship outside of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed in his book would actually be haram. So any relationship, whether we're talking about same sex or whether we're talking about in those relations that we had just mentioned earlier, in a practice like masturbation, it would still be considered haram unless what we had mentioned. أن تبتغوا بأموالكم محصنين غير مسافحين, to seek with the money. Now, here's one thing. Is it only money that is an obstacle to having a stable marriage? Absolutely not. But this ayah right there is emphasizing, because in most societies, it's usually money that people would surrender to. So therefore, that's why that ayah is emphasizing that the only way that you could use your money is really to get into a halal marriage relationship, غير مسافحين, and not use your money into a relationship with a woman that basically is in a compensation or in service or in sex services. So therefore, this ayah is basically emphasizing that prostitution is extremely haram in Islam. What about mahr? Isn't mahr a form of prostitution? Let's look into it. فما استمتعتم به منهن فآتوهن أجورهن فريضة. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فما استمتعتم. What is الاستمتاع? الاستمتاع is really having some form of amusement. But this ayah is basically emphasizing that if a man were in a marriage relationship, and of course it went farther than just a marriage contract, and we talked about two kinds. One, we said if there is a real intimacy, and two, if there is what is called al-khalwa sahiha, if they were alone together in a place where they can have, let's say, a private relationship, whether we're talking about foreplay or whether we're talking about intimacy, whether she induced or whether she started out the connection or whether it was him. Whoever started the flirtation is not here the subject. The subject is, was there any khalwa or not? If there is, then فَآتُوهُنَّ أُجُورَهُنَّ, then the man would actually be responsible to give the woman a faridah. What is al-faridah? Al-faridah means obligation, but this is actually saying that this man would actually be obligated to give the woman a mahr in compensation for giving him access to her in a marriage relationship. Whether that access was intimacy or whether that access was, let's call it, a private time.
I am confused.
Confused? Fair enough.
Yeah, because we want to know. Yeah. Can you get
Fair
the-
enough. So
الله أكبر الله أكبر
after
أشهد
Salah,
أن لا
inshallah.
إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. سبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لم تقولون ما لا تفعلون كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون. إن الله يحب الذين يقاتلون في سبيله صفا كأنهم بنيان مرصوص. وإذ قال موسى لقومه يا قوم لم تؤذونني وقد تعلمون أني رسول الله إليكم. فلما زاغوا أزاغ الله قلوبهم والله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين. وإذ قال عيسى ابن مريم يا بني إسرائيل إني رسول الله إليكم مصدقا لما بين يدي من التوراة برسول يأتي من بعدي ومبشرا برسول يأتي من بعد اسمه أحمد. فلما جاءهم بالبينات قالوا هذا سحر مبين. ومن أظلم ممن افترى على الله الكذب وهو يدعى إلى الإسلام والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. يريدون ليطفئوا نور الله بأفواههم والله متم نوره ولو كره الكافرون. هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا هل أدلكم على تجارة تنجيكم من عذاب أليم تؤمنون بالله ورسوله وتجاهدون في سبيل الله بأموالكم وأنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون يغفر لكم ذنوبكم ويدخلكم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ومساكن طيبة في جنات عدن ذلك الفوز العظيم وأخرى تحبونها نصر من الله وفتح قريب وبشر المؤمنين يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا أنصار الله كما قال عيسى ابن مريم للحواريين من أنصاري إلى الله قال الحواريون نحن أنصار الله فآمنت طائفة من بني إسرائيل وكفرت طائفة فأيدنا الذين آمنوا على عدوهم فأصبحوا ظاهرين. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Oh, okay. So I live, well, like I live near them.
All right, ready? Okay. No, no. I don't know. What? Let's go back. You were confused about something. What were you confused about?
Because you said that as long as there's a marriage contract and there's a intimacy and
Okay.
halwa sahiha,
Okay.
but what if you just marry for just that function and then
No, not that.
like the Shia people, they have a marriage like that.
No, we're going to talk about wata in just a bit.
Okay.
I wanted to appreciate zina and this.
Fair
You know
enough.
what I mean?
I like
Yeah.
it. Okay, let me. All right, inshallah. So to explain, what's the difference between marriage and zina? Got it? Okay, so what's the difference between al-ihsan and al-sifah? Okay. Now, for a marriage to be valid, so ladies, if we can have it quiet, please. What makes a marriage is number one, when we would have a man and a woman there is a wali, there are the witnesses, there is the consent from both sides. This would actually, and the witnesses, we said it, this would actually be considered a marriage. Got it? So we've got number one, wali, consent, two witnesses, and we said the consent, and of course, the man and the woman. Walima. Hold on. No, it's not. It's not. It's 50-50. Walima, some scholars regarded it as wajib, like the Malikiyya. They regarded it as that would be al-ishhar, that would be the witnessing part for Malikiyya. The non-Malikiyya, they regarded that al-walima is a recommended thing to do. Now let's continue with this one. So if we are to have these foundations in a relationship, in a marriage contract, then that would actually make it a marriage. But the wording itself, when we would give the consent, the marriage in Islam is very simple. Zawajtuka binti fulana, that's it. I married my daughter to you. The daughter, her name is Ayan, to you. Now, if the mahar was not mentioned, we would go for the average mahar. We would go for the average mahar. We would ask the mahar within your community, how much is it? And we would assign if there isn't an assigned mahar. Got it? Now, is-sifah is any of these not being there. What is is-sifah? What would be considered as a non-halal relationship. No, number one, if there's no wali. That's in Islam, zina. Two, there's no consent. That's zina. Three, there aren't any witnesses. She was in a room with him alone and she said, Zawajtuka nafsi. Zina. Zina. Number four, we said the wali was not there. zina. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith, أيما امرأة نكحت بغير إذن وليها فنكاحها باطل فنكاحها باطل فنكاحها باطل. Any woman that gets married without her wali, then her marriage is void or invalid, invalid, invalid. What if there isn't a wali?
Yes, like
As-
rivers.
السلطان ولي من لا ولي له.
Meaning?
السلطان, the person that is in leadership, that is the imam or the qadi, would act as the wali for those that don't have a wali.
Does he have to know the lady?
Who, the man?
The qadi.
The qadi? He doesn't have to know, but at least know different details, make sure that she's not married to someone else, that there's no fraud, that she's basically finished with her iddah if there is, that this man is not her brother somehow, just making sure all the different details are actually there to make this. Walaikum assalam. Go ahead, Noura.
Sorry, somebody had a question on the Zoom. I just wanted to let you know. Somebody.
Okay, walaikum assalam. What if the woman is older than 40, divorced? The Prophet ﷺ said, أيما امرأة نكحت. This أيما in Lugha Arabiya actually means any woman. This would include a woman that is 40 plus, a woman that had a previous marriage before, which is called al-ayyim or thayyib, or whether this woman was never married before, that is a virgin or a bikr. So the word ayyuma would be a general term in Lugha Arabiya to mean min alfaz al-umum. In Lugha Arabiya would basically mean any woman, generalizing whether that woman was 40 plus. I don't know why 40 plus sounds too old to everybody.
70.
Today's my birthday, by the way, you guys. So 44 officially. All right. 44. I mean, I don't celebrate birthdays. You can see me bring a cake, and it's just.
I'm just speaking.
Yeah, that's all
So
right.
70, you still need wali.
You 70, you still need a wali. 70. Now, what the Hanafis were saying, we did comment on that before.
Yes.
The part about the Hanafis when they said that the wali, and we mentioned that one last time. We said that what the Hanafis were saying, that the wali basically is mawqoof ala ijazat al-wali. What does that mean? We said what they regarded was that the wali has the right to object to that marriage even if he wasn't present during the marriage contract. In other words, it really means the same thing. So what the Hanafi was basically saying, that even if we were to have a woman that is, let's say, 40 plus, okay, and this man, and we had the witnesses, we had the consent, and then the imam was there and basically got them married, and then the wali later on, he said, what? You actually got married? No, you can't get married to this man. This man is a drug addict. So in that situation, the wali can actually come in and say, this marriage is not going to continue. In other words, it's pending.
Shafi'i or just
Hanafi.
what about Shafi'i? Where's Shafi'i?
Hold on. So Hanafi would say pending. We cannot have this marriage go and move forward till the wali is there. So a very common misunderstanding is that people would think that, oh, the Hanafi said a woman doesn't need a wali if she's old. Wrong. They actually said mawquf. No madhab said that, and that a woman can get married without a wali. No madhab. Hadith is really clear. For the Shafi'iyya and the other majority, they actually said, no, the wali from the start would actually have to be present from the start. This is not to object later, but from the start. Got it? Go ahead. Hold on. She had a question.
Like sometimes I hear about situations that like a woman, like her women say no because maybe of like race or something else.
Fair enough. Let me explain that one. So we talked about it, right? So let me, okay. Let me explain that one. Right? All right. Now let me explain that one. For the Hanafi, they actually had expanded in the different categories that they regarded what actually qualifies for a man to be fit for a woman. They didn't look at the other way. Why did they look at the man's qualification, not the other way? And this is a major problem that we have, that we look at the woman's qualification and not the man's qualification. In Islam, no, we're going to look at the man's qualification. Why? Because you're going to be the head of the family. We're going to scrutinize every single thing about you. About the man. Why? Because she's going to be under your leadership. We need to scrutinize that. For the Hanafi madhab, they expanded the categories and they regarded things like his job, even his race. They took it in consideration. They said, well, wait a minute. We also need to consider that. Even that, why would you consider that? They said, well, that's because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that there's a compatibility. Race, what does race have to do with compatibility? Well, they said, well, because you're going to increase the chances of miscommunication. It's a different race. It's a different history. So many different things can actually go into a relationship without you recognizing your race plays a very important role in making you who you are. For the Shafi'iyya and the other madhahib, things like race, they didn't look into it except for Arabi women. That was a different thing. I would say it's the influence of their uruba, I would say probably coming in. But they didn't actually look into the other things as much as the Hanafi madhab. For the other madhahib, they did look into things like wealth, things like whether she's free or whether she's not, or a slave woman, or things like the job, all these different, the deen part, they did look into it. So then they said, well, if the father would come in and say, in what is called adl al-wali. What is adl al-wali? Adl al-wali is if the wali were to abuse his authority and power and to not give the daughter the freedom to get married to that person. Maybe he came forward and he said, well, we're Darud and this guy is Hawiya, we're two different things and all that. In that situation, the Qadi will say, sorry, Dad, but such an objection. You're both Somali, you're both the same background. I don't care about all your civil war and that you think that somehow these people are inferior. I'm not going to absorb that. This man has good deen, he's good, he's definitely seeming healthy. He's definitely looking mentally sound. He's educated. He's definitely seeming like he doesn't have any type of a sexual STD or anything like that. And he's making good money. And therefore, sorry, Dad, we're not going to actually take that as an objection that we're going to accept. But I don't care, Mr. Qadi will come in and say, we're not going to take that. For the Hanafi, on the other hand, they will say, I'm going to take that. Because there are so many different cultural differences that might actually contribute. And I'm going to take the father's objection into consideration, because at the end of the day, is that maybe this community actually has a different culture that contributes into their understanding, the way they treat women, whatever it is, all these different things that I don't know of. And the Hanafi Qadi might take it in consideration. Yes.
Yeah.
The Hanafi Qadi will take it in consideration. The Shafi'i Qadi will say, sorry, objection. I don't care if you have these kinds of discriminations and these different classifications. We don't buy these. You see it? You see the difference?
Yeah, but you also explained that the wali has this
Right, we
power because he also has to take care of damage. in
of
case the
course,
marriage-
because at the end, الغنم بالغرم.
That's what I want.
الغنم بالغرم. So why even give the father any authority? Because at the end of the day, if anything goes wrong, we're going to hold him responsible. We're going to say, oh, the marriage didn't work out. And you're going to be there to support your daughter. And that's why we'll hold him accountable. All right. So in Islam, it's definitely making sure that the father is not abusing his authority in doing what is called Ard al-Wali, but at the same time, it's always there to make sure that we're not seeing people abuse their authority, and we're not seeing girls that are also getting too emotional and too enthusiastic about being in a relationship with a guy. And I see this all the time, ladies. Most of the times, when women come forward, when she wants to get married, she wants to get married right now. Believe it or not, I've had a woman one time during class come to me and actually bring her boyfriend, whatever we want to call him, bring him outside the masjid and say, I need to get married right now. Can you do me my marriage contract right now? I said, I've got a class right now. I said, no, I need to get married right now. I said, what? Things don't go like that. I said, no, I need to get married right now. He's outside. And I'm all dressed up and ready. I said, what? What kind of games are you playing? And just a couple months before that, she called me, that same woman, and this happens a lot. I need to get divorced right now. When she wants to get a divorce, she wants that done now. I can't live not a single minute. It's bad for my mental health. I need to get divorced right now.
How does she keep calling?
This is not just one, but this is so common, to be honest.
Why would she call the
They would, this is very common that women, when they want to get married, she wants to get married right now. And when she wants to get a divorce, she wants to get a divorce right now. It's like right now, not a process, not let's think about it. Let's process it. Let's see, let's work out different things right now. I need to get this done right now. All right. محصنين غير مسافحين. You brought, she's too hormonal. All right. Maybe. What if a wali is a long distance and cannot be present in the nikah? They can do a power of attorney if the wali is not there. And right now they do actually do virtual nikah as well.
With Zoom?
Zoom, oh yeah, right now through Zoom. Before it was Skype, whatever it is, they do actually do virtual. So the wali is actually present and all of that. So it's a lot easier than you think. Let's see, one more question. Brothers are getting angry when we assist investigating them, ask for a background. Okay, I said if a lab from another country, it should be done. You know, they can get angry, they can get frustrated, but you're not going to. And here's one thing, ladies, many women don't value themselves. So she's worried that this potential candidate, we don't want to hurt their feelings because we don't want them going away and be hurt. And then she ends up really being caught in the knot. That's why the wali would be there to say, I don't care if you're hurt. We're going to check your background. We're going to see your deen. We're going to see your health. And we would like to see your mental health. And we would also like to see your STD history, if there is any. We would like to do a blood test. Number 5, we would like to see your financial management, and we would, just like we would hire somebody, we would do a background check. Why not do a background check when you're talking about a relationship like marriage? Do a background check and really be thorough about it. Don't throw your daughter and don't throw yourself in anybody's hands like that. Value yourself. Even if this potential candidate was not feeling very comfortable in getting a background check done on him, well, if he was not too comfortable, well, that means he's hiding something. That means he's hiding something, or else why would you not be comfortable? If you know yourself that you're all fine, you shouldn't be worried that somebody's doing a background check on you. So here, no, for me it's mandatory, but there's been a few men that got angry because I have children, it must be done. Well, not only because if you have children, but do a background check whether there are children or whether there aren't any children. It's not only your children that are valuable, you are valuable too. No, do a background check. Because remember, this person is the person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is requiring you to consider him as your authority, is requiring you to basically obey him. Make sure you're doing a background check for this CEO that you're going to be working for. You're going to be working for this person. Do a background check. No, seriously, you're going to be working for this person, literally.
Every day.
Every single day.
24 hours a day.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to be working for this person, literally. I'm going to be obeying this person. This person is going to be my boss.
And disobedience is haram.
And disobedience is haram. I got to make sure that he really is worth working for. Like, yeah. Sorry, ladies. I got my African-American gene coming up right now.
No, we agree. Yeah, we agree.
You agree? Mm-hmm.
Like that part.
Let's go. فما استمتعتم به منهن فآتوهن أجورهن فريضة.
Exactly, that's what I'm talking about.
You know, here's one thing. زواج المتعة. Let me just talk about a couple marriages. Shia people stuff. There you go. Let me just explain a couple things here. Let me first go to, I'm going to explain, what was that? Okay, we're going to explain a couple things here. Let me remind me to share the screen right here. Okay, so there are a couple different kinds of marriages. Number one is what is called, okay, we've got zawaj al-sahih. Basically, we would have a marriage in where the wali is there, the witnesses are there, the consent is there, and we've got the wording for the marriage is there, etc. And we've got our shuhud and our witnesses are there. Zawaj sahih. Now, there's also zawaj al-fasid. Now, الزواج الفاسد. Pay attention to this one. Fasid, not fasiq. So fasid, in where, yes, for the majority of the scholars, they actually said الزواج الفاسد is the same thing as الزواج الباطل. Let me explain one thing. الباطل actually means an invalid marriage. Whether there was no wali, there was, or maybe no consent, or maybe there was no witnesses. That's batal. That's not a marriage. Okay? Got it? Now, in situations, did we actually share the screen? Yes. In situations where we might actually have, maybe we had the witnesses, but to later discover that one of the witnesses was actually not Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ said that it's actually shahida adl, that there's actually supposed to be two witnesses that are adl. Adl doesn't mean justice, but it actually means sound. And that means, number one, Islam is there. These people are capable of understanding. But we discovered that one of them is not Muslim, or maybe one of them is actually with Down syndrome. In other words, he's not mentally sound. In that situation, are we going to rush in saying, this is a zawaj batil, and actually say, okay, this is a relationship that is nothing but zina? So, الزواج الفاسد and الزواج الباطل are both the same thing. Zawaj fasid and zawaj batil, there is one of the things within the pillars of a marriage, consent, wali, witnesses, is not there. That makes it an invalid marriage. The only situations where we would regard as a fasid marriage would be in situations to avoid implementing criminal charges.
Okay.
All right? Repeat that. In other words, when there is a doubt in the marriage contract in any way, or something popped up, we would then consider that we're not going to consider these couples as actually deserving criminal charges because of some form of a shubha, some form of doubt happened in the case. Let's give an example. Man and a woman got married. One of the witnesses, like we said, had Down syndrome, but the person that did the marriage contract didn't know that the witnesses were actually supposed to be mentally sound, Muslim, and even understanding, or at least having the certain qualifications. They said they thought it was okay. In that situation, we're going to redo the marriage, but we're not going to apply criminal charges on them because of this shubha, because of this doubt. Let's give another example. Man and a woman got married. Later, a lady comes up and she says, "You guys actually got married. I nursed both of you. I ran a daycare, and every single time your mom was always late, I nursed you."
You picked the worst example.
I nursed both of you. Your mom was always late. I nursed you. In that situation, we're going to not press criminal charges because they didn't know. But there's going to be an invalid marriage. We're going to say we're going to separate. We're going to do fasq. This is an invalid marriage. This is a zawaj fasid. And therefore, we're not going to press charges, but we will consider this marriage as an invalid marriage. But they already had 5 kids. The kids will be attributed to their dad. But the marriage is going to be ending. Got it? We're not going to press criminal charges. That's the only time when we would see these two things. Now, other situations of zawaj batil. Number 1 is that in situations where we would have something where probably appointing a certain time for marriage. We're going to get married for a day.
That's the one.
Then in that situation, this would be called zawaj al-mut'a. Zawaj al-mut'a, number 1, was in the early time of Islam actually considered permissible, exactly like so many different things in where the Prophet ﷺ, in the early times of Islam, did not actually say drinking alcohol was haram. Women didn't wear hijab. So many practices were permissible. So was zawaj al-mut'a. What is mut'a marriage? Mut'a marriage is temporary marriage. Temporary marriage, whether it's getting married for a certain time, a day, 2 days, 3 days, a month, 2 months, 3 months, and it was a practice that they would practice at the time, but then later Islam prohibited it, and then later again permitted it during the Battle of Autas. And then later in the 7th year Hijrah, it was narrated through Ali ibn Abi Talib, the hadith is authentic, that during the time of Khaybar, 3 things that the Prophet ﷺ had announced to be prohibited: mut'a marriage, eating donkey's meat. The Prophet Ali ibn Abi Talib said that the Prophet ﷺ had regarded those as completely prohibited till the day of Judgment Day.
Which battle was that?
That was during Khaybar. Khaybar happened in the 7th year Hijrah. Now, some Sahaba, like Abdullah ibn Abbas, who was only 13 or 12 years old at the time, he, of course, being a young boy, didn't actually know that that was the final ruling. And there were some reports that he had said that it was still permissible. But later, Abdullah ibn Abbas discovered that he was actually wrong on it and did go back on that idea. Now, Zawaj al-Mut'ah, in the way that is practiced even by the Shia, what does it look like? A woman would see a man, we're going to get married to you for 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever it is, and here's your mahr payment, a compensation for this relationship, was never permitted ever in Islam. This type of a relationship is nothing but prostitution. Zina was never permitted in Islam. Never. No, we're good. Allah barik feek. It was never permitted in Islam, and therefore to actually say that this is at all permitted is actually against and is nothing but zina. Now, zawaj al-mut'ah, they would regard that, one, there is no talaq in zawaj al-mut'ah. They just separate. No talaq. Two, there's no mirath. So when talaq was considered as the only way out of a marriage, that had abrogated zawaj al-mut'ah that was practiced before. Two, mirath. There's no inheritance in zawaj al-mut'ah. When Islam had regulated that the husband and the wife would inherit one another, that also is another evidence to abrogate the whole concept of zawaj al-mut'ah. Number two kind of marriage, it's called zawaj al-misyar. Zawaj al-misyar was never something.
Number four, actually. Number four, I have Sahih, Fasid, and then I have Mut'ah.
So zawaj al-mut'ah is actually batil. It's actually batil. And Umar ibn al-Khattab, look at the language that he used. Umar ibn al-Khattab said, whoever would practice such a type of marriage, I have no place for them but under the ground. Right? What does he mean by that? What does he mean by that?
You don't have the four conditions, right?
Stoning. For Umar al-Khattab, he's like, I have no place for them but under the ground. Only have one place for them. He's like, stoning. That's it. That was Umar al-Khattab. But of course, this would be for somebody that had a marriage relationship before.
Yes.
Oh?
Not before 100 lashes.
100 lashes. Good job. Zawaj al-misyar is different. Zawaj al-misyar is only a recent thing that the modern contemporary scholars had actually discussed. What does that look like? So zawaj al-misyar is practiced in the Gulf. A woman, she basically is rich, has a lot of money, and she wants to get married, but she doesn't want a man to always dictate for her everything. She just wants a halal relationship. She's got all the money. She's like, I don't need you to spend over me. I'll take care of all the spending. I just want you to come to me every couple days for a couple minutes or an hour or so and do your job and leave. Zawaj al-misyan. She's like, I've got my wali. I'm okay with that. Don't need you to do me nafaqa. Don't need you to pay for my bills. Don't need you to pay for anything. Just want you to come in, and that's basically it. We've got our shahood, we've got our consent, we've got everything.
But it's not qawama, it's not making policy.
Exactly. It's like, now, two different opinions between scholars on such type of a marriage. The first opinion said this type of marriage is batil. Why? They said, yes, you've got the wali. Yes, you've got the witnesses. Yes, you've got the consent. They said, but that is contradicting the whole idea and the concept of marriage in Islam. This is not an issue of some kind of a transaction in where, yeah, we've got these, because in Islam, they said in Islam, there's also the non-pragmatic side of it, which is that there's the ruh. That's what the ruh, the main basis of marriage is, that there would be a qawama, there would be a whole institution to protect the children if there are, to make sure that there is a bond, to make sure that the relationship is basically to make a foundation of family. That's the first opinion. They said this contradicts the whole reason of why marriage was regarded as halal in the first place. The second opinion, they said this marriage is halal. Why? They said, well, she gave up on her rights. She decided, I don't want your financial rights. Don't worry, I'm a millionaire. I've got my business and I've got this. She just wants a halal relationship. She willingly gave up on her rights. She willingly gave up on her rights. The man is probably married to a first woman.
Yes.
And she's giving up on her rights. She's like, it's okay, I'll take care of all the matters. I just want a halal relationship. She willingly gave up on her rights. Then why are you, in what evidence are you putting to sanction such a marriage when they both are consenting to give up on their rights? The objection was, well, if you're going to just look at the start, what if problems later rise? Children come up, the woman lost her $1 million, and then what are we going to do? Then what we just got into was bringing in more and more problems, because we started out with a foundation that was from the start treated like a business transaction and not a marriage relationship. They said those are two different things. If you look at it as if it was, well, she consented and she gave up on it, to say she consented and she gave up on her rights, you're treating it as a business transaction. And marriage relations and a marriage contract is not a business transaction, but is a foundation of family. That was the objection.
Preponderant ruling.
Exactly.
Preponderant ruling, fair enough. Preponderant ruling is that you cannot necessarily say it is haram per se, because to say it is haram would actually put us in a zawaj batil. And would actually mean we would have to consider them as basically committing a haram relationship. But we have all the different pillars of making a marriage contract valid. All right. So it's not a haram marriage, but I would recommend against it and explain to the woman and to the man that if the woman loses her millions and she basically wants to be a wife again, you just have to keep in mind that that is a possibility. And if situations basically don't turn out as expected, the conditions will drop and the marriage relationship will continue.
Can I do
Because you cannot treat it as a business contract, you would treat it as a marriage contract. Two different things.
Can I do the marriage contract again when my million is gone?
You can, no, you cannot do your marriage contract again when your millions are gone, because the marriage contract actually happened before. If we were going to update it, there's no such thing as updating a marriage contract unless a talaq does happen and the iddah happens, and then you want to redo a marriage contract. That's the only time. The other type of zawaj is basically called a zawaj al-urfi. What is الزواج العرفي? A common misunderstanding and a misinformation. They would think a زواج العرفي is a secret marriage. No, that's not what a زواج عرفي is. الزواج العرفي is an unregistered / unlicensed marriage. What does that mean? We got the wali, we got the witnesses, we got everybody, but because marrying a second wife, for example, is illegal, so what they did was they got married Islamically, but didn't register it in the county because they were afraid that this would be considered illegal, and then therefore they would be basically considered as doing something illegal. So they decided to do zawaj urfi. In other words, an Islamic marriage, everything is there. They even did a wedding, but they just didn't register it in the county, or didn't even register it in the official papers in the masjid. They got the imam right there, and all these people right here, and they did everything exactly like you would do any other marriage. They just didn't register it on paper and document it legally. This is a zawaj urfi. Is it halal?
Halal.
It's halal.
Meet all the conditions.
It met all the conditions. It met all the conditions. Do we recommend it? No. Why don't we recommend it? Although people have different circumstances, but here's one thing you want to keep in mind. When you have marriages are not registered, when things go wrong, the masjid, the imam, and all the Muslim ummah all around the world cannot be there to help you. Law enforcement has the power more than all the millions and the billions of the Muslims all around the world. If things were to go wrong, we cannot help you. Neither can the imam. He doesn't have the power to help you in any way. If that man decides to turn around and not pay his duties, not do the child support and whatever it is, then you are going to be the one basically paying the price. So that's why I don't recommend it, but every single person has their circumstances. Allahu a'lam biha. All right, what time is it? We're gonna stop right here. The ayah is really, which let's see. There's no qawam that this would be a problem. Okay, which country came up with this? Came up with what? Misyar. So it's not which country, it's that you have a lot of people in the Gulf, a lot of very wealthy women. They were the ones that actually needed this type of marriage, which is zawaj al-misyar, and that actually rose in the Gulf countries. We're talking about very, very rich women that to them, they didn't want this type of a qawam to be there. They just wanted a halal relationship. So that was really in the Gulf. And I really mean very wealthy women. All right. So this is just to explain that. وَلَا جُنَاحَ لَكُمْ فِيمَا تَرَاضَيْتُمْ بِهِ مِنْ بَعْدِ الْفَرِيضَةِ. So that situation, of course, we're talking about a halal marriage and not a mut'a marriage. Mut'a marriage is forbidden in Islam, and there is ijma'. There is an ijma' that it is forbidden according to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and only the Shi'as would actually, not all the Shia. So the Shia in Persia / Iran, they would practice it. In the Shia of Iraq, they don't look at it as an acceptable practice, and or at least an honorable practice either. Inna Allah kana aliman hakima, that the Lord Almighty is all-knowing and all-wise. And this is the ayah right there. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ مِنْكُمْ طَوْلًا أَن يَنْكِحَ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ فَمِمَّا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. This ayah is basically the ayah. And if you cannot afford tawla, number one, tawla to mean if you cannot afford financially to get married, the muhsanat al-mu'minat, al-muhsanat here is different than here, because al-muhsanat here is to mean al-afifat, the bashful women, the bashful believing women. If you cannot afford financially, or you cannot afford to get married to free women. What does that mean? That means that Islam regarded that getting married or being intimate with the slave women is not something that Islam liked. This ayah is telling you that no, don't go that route unless you cannot afford financially or cannot have access to get married to free women. Then that's when, as an alternative, okay, go for milk al-yamin, but that's not necessarily the desired and the preferred option. So here's the question: al-muhsanat al-mu'minat, does that mean that the man can not get married to non-Muslim women? No, because you've got other ayat, وَطَعَامُ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ حَلٌّ لَكُمْ, and of course the women are the women of Ahl al-Kitab. So a man can get married to a Christian woman and a Jewish woman, but a Muslim woman cannot get married to a Christian or a Jewish man. What's the evidence? لا هن حل لكم ولا هم يحلون لهن. In Surah al-Mumtahina, it was left at that in Surah al-Mumtahina, that a Muslim woman cannot get married to a kafir. And the ayah in Surah al-Ma'idah talking about that Muslim men can get married to their women, that is a Christian or a Jewish woman, on a condition that she is muhsana. She's a bashful woman, not a woman that basically starts to cheating and having boyfriends and so forth. So what about this ayah right there? This is in place of a preference, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preferring a woman that is a believing woman over a non-believing woman. And فَمِمَّا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, if you cannot afford to get married to a free woman, then in that situation, that is basically, this is what is preferred. The alternate option would be is to basically be in a relationship with the woman that he owns in a slave bond, in that situation, on a condition that she would be mu'mina, Now, does that mean that a bondswoman, he cannot be intimate with her unless she's Muslim? No.
The concubine story.
Concubine story, exactly. So if she is a Christian or a Jew, or a Muslim, he can, if he owns her, not his sons and all of these. No, this is not a public property. It's a marriage relationship. If the father owns this concubine, then the son cannot get married to her in any way whatsoever. She becomes a mahram forever. Got it? Now, this right here basically is a part of preference, that if it's a woman that is a concubine, if it's a believing woman, that would be better. But it is permissible to actually be intimate with a Christian or a Jewish concubine, but not any other faith. Not any other faith. If she was Hindu concubine, he can't be intimate with her. Got it? So Islam, in other words, regards that this is a marriage relationship. This is a marriage relationship and not some form of rape. Is there rape in Islam? No. There's no rape in Islam. Of course there's rape in Islam. But there's no such thing as marriage rape. What? I know everybody, what's going on? What? Let me explain it. There's no such thing in Islam as marriage rape. Because in Islam, when the marriage happened, that's when the consent happened. All right? When the marriage contract happened, that's when the consent happened. Why won't you consider it as marriage right? Because in Islam, Islam is very strict when it comes to holding anybody or pressing charges and considering anybody as a felon or holding them as and pressing criminal charges on them. You cannot press criminal charges when there is doubt. Period.
So because he's your husband, is doubt.
Because he's your husband, we don't know how you interpreted the consent. We don't know. So you turned your back, but he thought, oh, that means she's interested. We can't, we don't know how this is enclosed space. So Islam will say, well, we need to actually look into something that we could measure. The consent happened on the day of the marriage contract. So therefore, we would regard that as consent. Now, how you two interpreted each other's in private, how you two interpreted each other's rejection, objection, you didn't like, he interpreted this, you interpreted that, he thought you were playing, you, etc. All of that is going to be hard for us to prove in order to press criminal charges.
What if he punched you and beat you in the house?
At the end of the day, we don't really know, because when we want to prove and hold anybody as a criminal, we need strong evidence. And because such things can be interpreted differently in closed doors, we don't really know. Maybe you scratched yourself and claimed that it was him. How should I know? How should I know? So in Islam, we would look into it and say, is there a marriage contract? Yes, there is. Then we would say, this can't be something that we can regard and press as a crime and actually hold him as responsible as a rape situation. But Islam will tell the man that if the woman is rejecting, the Prophet ﷺ was telling you, which is not befit for a believing man, that if a woman, that he would deal with a woman with disrespect throughout the day, then be as a mule at the end of the day, asking her to bed. This is the Prophet ﷺ. In other words, he was saying this is not appropriate, not befit for a man. You want your woman, then you treat her with respect throughout the day. Throughout the day, and then that relationship will basically be in a situation where she would come and be there for you, but not treat her like a mule and like an animal. Got it? So Islam does emphasize that this is not right, but at the same time, a criminal charge is actually to mean a criminal punishment. Imagine this, a criminal punishment for somebody that is married actually means stoning in Islam. You see what I'm saying? So Islam will say, whenever tudra'ul hudud bishubuhat, this is the general law. Whenever I would have a criminal charge, I would have to seek the different doubts in order to make sure that this crime to be or claimed crime, that there's no doubt or anything to protect this person from getting accused of any crime that where there's doubt in it. Because Islam is really serious. Islam is not looking for evidence to press crimes and put criminal charges on people. Islam is there to protect people from getting indicted, not the other way around. Islam doesn't want to indict you. Islam wants to seek ways to protect you, whether protect you or protect your husband. considers that the individual is supposed to be protected from any charge, and we look for doubt to make sure that you're protected and you are innocent until proven guilty. I cannot prove you guilty when I actually have a marriage contract that proved that there was a consent in the beginning. So that's why in Islam, there's no such thing as marital rape.
Last scenario.
But there is rape on the outside. So if we would basically do a test and we would basically tell you, hey, go to the doctor right away when you got raped or whatever, and let them actually don't take a shower and go to the hospital. No, go to the hospital right away so they can actually do all the testing and all of that. Your OB would check it to make sure that there really was no consent and that you were really raped, etc., to make sure that it wasn't a zina case and that it was actually a rape case. Then in that situation, you would actually have your rights if this was outside of marriage. Go ahead, my dear.
Last scenario. What if there was a baby come? There's a camera there because there was a baby.
If a baby came, so fair enough. If this is marriage or outside of marriage?
Marriage first.
Marriage first, fair enough. So if there was a marriage, okay, then scholars had differences of opinions. I did actually do a whole lecture on abortion, okay? I did do a whole lecture on abortion. Abortion, the default ruling is that abortion is haram. This is the default ruling. Whether you're saying plan B or whether you're basically later down the road taking some medications to basically abort the baby. The default ruling is that abortion is haram. In situations, the earlier situation before 120 days, we would look at it a case by case. If the case was going very severe in where there is harm on the woman's health, or harm on the baby's health, or harm on mental health, then we would take a case by case and actually see whether we're talking about plan B or even other medications to abort the baby. Okay? Now, once we're talking about after 120 days, it's from the date of conception, then in that situation, we would only take in consideration if we are very clear that the woman's health or her life is actually in danger. That's the only time when we would abort the baby, not mental health. Not mental health, but we're talking about life here. If we're talking about 120 days of a pregnancy,
17 weeks.
If we're talking about 120 days of pregnancy, and let's say the woman was going through depression, etc., we're saying we cannot abort a baby because you're going through depression. We'll work on your depression later, but we cannot kill someone because you're feeling depressed about it. But if we are basically having the doctors tell us, well, she's taking chemotherapy, and this baby, we're doing the ultrasound, and we're seeing that this baby has no head, has no heart, then in that situation, we're right there definitive that this baby is basically going to die anyways. This baby is dead. Then in that situation, we'll say, why get her through the whole suffering of a couple more months? Because anyways, if this baby is dead, to leave the baby to decompose inside of her is basically they're going to determine that this woman is going to get sick. She's going to die. In that situation, we'll say abort the baby. Even if it's 120 days, even if it's 120 days. We did an ultrasound, they do it in all these different things. Then in that situation, we would say, well, if the woman's life is in danger, or the baby's life right now is determined that this baby is not going to be living, he's got no head or not no hand, not that there's some deformality, but we're seeing that this baby is considered that this is nothing but a vegetable. Then in that situation, we'll basically look at a case by case, and we would then determine whether that case qualifies for abortion or not. And of course, the farther it goes up into the pregnancy, the more strict we will be in saying that this qualifies for an abortion. Got it? Go ahead, my dear.
In the case where it's like either save the mom's life or the baby's life.
The mom's life is precedent over the baby's life. Absolutely. The mom's life is precedent over the baby's life.
Texting me questions.
What is the question?
Is birth control allowed? Is plan B?
Okay, is birth control allowed? So birth control, you've got two types of birth control. The first type of birth control is basically just like Paragard, it basically doesn't allow pregnancy from the very start. The second type of birth control is basically it lets an actual pregnancy happen, but then in the early stages, it basically drops it. So differences of opinions between scholars, between modern scholars on that, but for those pregnant, for the majority of the scholars did regard that both types of birth controls are actually permissible to use. So whether you're using IUDs, whether you're using pills, contraceptive pills, patches, whether you're using injections, all those are actually permissible to use unless there was going to be harm on the woman. Okay? So the ones that we talked about, the Paragard and the Marina one, those were the IUDs. I just explained it really quick. And the other types of birth controls are actually permissible to use in general. For the plan B, that would be permissible only in situations where we would have some kind of a case that happened, maybe a rape, incest, an exceptional case. In that situation, you can actually use those in those situations. It seems like even if it's not haram, would it contradict the command to treat wives equally if one was officially registered under the law and was afforded the associated rights? What does that mean?
She's talking about she doesn't have
You don't have
equality.
So in the end, that woman in Zawaj al-Misyar, she basically decided that she's okay anyways.
She's talking about like
the one in this country.
yeah.
Oh, no. In Islam, okay, I love the question. If I have a marriage that is Zawaj Urfi and a woman that basically was married legally, that doesn't take precedence. In Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's eyes, both marriages are to be treated equally, and both marriages are to be given the rights. The children, the wives are to be given the fair distribution of time stay, the wealth, and the quality time, and all of that. There's in Islam, whether you registered it or didn't register it in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a marriage, it takes all the different rules, and you have to have taqwa to abide by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles. Go ahead, my dear.
When you're pregnant, the doctor recommends says I have to look at the baby, abnormality or something like that through the abdominal. Is this halal or?
So if we're talking about an abnormality, let's say, and here's one thing, is that they wouldn't be capable of knowing about the abnormality usually until after 14 or 15 weeks of pregnancy, which actually would mean it had went beyond the time. So let's say they wanted to check for Down syndrome. And let's just assume that they did discover that according to their measurements that the baby might have Down syndrome. It would be haram to abort the baby. So the abnormality, not every abnormality would qualify for an abortion in Islam, and their qualification of abortion is different than Islam. Okay, so in Islam, abortion is the default ruling is haram. The default ruling is haram. Only in exceptional cases would it be permissible. So just by having an abnormality, that doesn't necessarily qualify to abort the baby. No, it's not haram to check it. Why not? Prepare yourself. Why not? Prepare yourself. It's actually good to make sure to check beforehand It's very important to check beforehand for abnormalities because that would prepare the doctors beforehand on what to prepare within the ward. It's very important to check because if there are abnormalities, maybe needed oxygen, maybe needed certain doctors to be on guard, maybe nephrologist or who knows what type of doctors, they needed to be to prepare those doctors, especially when the baby is first born, to anticipate what complications are there, can sometimes actually help help the baby stay alive sometimes.
Sometimes they do it through the ultrasound.
Well, yeah, ultrasound, blood tests, that's testing your different blood tests in order to see so many different things. So that's absolutely permissible.
The one I'm talking about, the one they go through the
Right. So basically the one where they would stick a needle, all of that. So here's one thing. It is permissible to do, but you want to keep in mind that that one actually has certain complications, that it does have certain complications, but at the end of the day, are you permitted to do it? Yes, you are. What if they discover that the baby does have Down syndrome? It is not permissible to abort the baby just because they might have Down syndrome, or even if they were 100% sure that this baby has Down syndrome, it's haram to abort the baby. Not because they have Down syndrome, it doesn't mean they don't have the right to live.
For illegal abortion, you have to, the tawbah, you fast 2 months, you pay blood money.
Okay. For illegal, or let's call it haram abortion, if a person actually did haram abortion, that is considered that they had actually committed a crime and that they had killed a person that has a respected life. If an abortion, let's say she didn't know and that happened, she would have to she would have to fast 2 months in a row, and whoever was involved in this as well. Number two, the woman, if it's the woman, they would have to also pay the blood money. Is birth control allowed? We did mention the IUD, the different kinds of IUD. Just to think about that needle. Okay, how could she fast 2 months in a row? What about her periods? Yes, those times that she has her period in, she would basically take that off anyways.
And the blood money is less.
The blood money is less than a full human being. A blood money is diya, so we're looking at approximately, give or take, don't take my word for it, approximately $10,000-$12,000, somewhere within that number. Don't take my word for it.
That's
because
for
of the
the
inflation.
abortion.
Sometimes I would get lost.
That's for abortion. For a person, it's 250,000.
For
abortion, it's
right,
zero.
we're talking about give or take.
Who gets the blood money for the aborted baby?
If
The
the woman
father.
did it, then the father
The
does.
father.
If they both agreed to it,
Who do they give?
who do they give it to? Well, they would, we'll talk about who they give it to later on. We had a daughter that had a serious genetic metabolic disorder and required hospitalization until she was 6, for surgeries, interventions, and did not eat, was in pain her whole life. My husband and I are both carriers, and we were able to test at 11 weeks in this case, where abortion would would abortion be permissible? It's a case by case, so that genetic metabolic disorder, we would have to look into it. The person to ask, since this is a pediatric thing, the person to ask would definitely be Dr. Hatem Al-Haj. He would know, looking at the testing and the genetic testing and all of that, he would definitely have the better and best answer. I would basically forward that question to him because I'm not a pediatrician to know what genetic disorder that is and whether there is an update for any treatment, because right now your daughter's sick and is probably 6 years old, or I don't know how old she is. But of course, medicine is always doing a lot of studies, so I don't know what updated studies there are to give treatment, or if there is any possible treatment, or what different ways, not only for treatment or even for prevention there are. So I wouldn't really be able to answer that question. She passed away. La ilaha illallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you, Ya Rabbi, give you the sabr and give you the reward for the patience and even enduring all of that pain in losing a child, or even going through the pains of going back and forth to the hospital and so forth. And may she be may she be one to intercede for you to enter Jannah. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. There is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, whoever loses a loved one and was patient, I do not know any other reward for them but Jannah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you Jannah. Allahumma ameen. So this is it for today. You ladies were very patient. Barakallah. Who?
A lot of beautiful new
MashaAllah, a lot of beautiful new students. Go ahead, my dear. Freedom in Islam? Prenup. Okay, what about it? So definitely I would recommend, if you basically, let's say you got, prenup and all of that, if you basically are married, you've got money and he's got money, definitely it would reduce the problems if you were to beforehand, agree on certain things in terms of marriage and money and how to organize that. So that is definitely something that is permissible. But of course, it depends on all the different details of what is permissible and what is not. So the woman does actually have the right for her independent financial, let's say, ownership and even her own money, etc. So there are a number of different things. So I would definitely recommend, let me say, organizing the financial responsibilities and rights before marriage does happen.
So that will not go against inheritance?
So unless you're actually going into inheritance, then in that situation, this cannot be included in the prenup, because inheritance, it's a sacred thing. It has all its distribution. But if we're talking about how much for her to invest from her own income inside the marriage, how much, what bills should she be paying, whatever it is, all these different things, you can agree onto it, because in the end, just heads up, scholars actually had differences of opinions on a working woman, whether she should invest from her money half, 3/4, 1/4, 1/3, 2/3, none, zero, not a single penny. Scholars actually had differences of opinions on that. This is important to keep in mind. I know you would hear so many times I would say the enthusiasm that a lot of times would take the dua in saying a woman doesn't have to pay a single penny. That's actually not quite true. Scholars had differences of opinions on a working woman and whether she does invest within the household or not. So that's why it's important to have that prenup that you're talking about, just to make sure that we agree from the beginning, whether we're having a joint account or a separate account, or how much she's investing, whether she is going to be working or not working, how much is he going to be basically having the right over her money and all of that. It's very important to discuss before marriage. Very important to discuss before marriage, especially if this is important to you. Some women, they're like, well, I trust his deen. We're going to make a joint property. And hey, whatever I invest in, he invests in, and we're both together. Anyways, we're building a home. Well, good for you. Good luck. All right. Good luck. Good for you. But that's not how everybody else sees it. So definitely talk about this before marriage. All right.
You said the zawaj al-muta' it has like no talaq, no inheritance.
Right.
And what was the third thing? I didn't get the third thing.
No idda. So the idda would only be, let me take that back. Al-idda would be basically one cycle. All right. So in Islam, of course, what are you talking about? Imagine والله no عدة, no طلاق. What is this? This is plain zina. That's why you have a lot of STDs in Iran.
She has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is like a hypothetical, but say like there's a non-Muslim couple, and then the woman converts to Islam, but her husband's not willing to convert. What happens in that?
Fair enough. If we basically had a woman become Muslim and she is married to this man, in that situation, she cannot be intimate with him, all right? And he would give a certain time lapse. Is it 3 months? Is it 3 days? So basically, she cannot be intimate with him until he becomes Muslim. So exactly, it's really hard. It's a lot to actually work on. But when a woman becomes Muslim, let's say she reverted to Islam, it's very important to keep in mind that kufr is a bigger sin than zina. So even if I were to have a woman and she said, I believe in Islam, but I'm not going to sacrifice my marriage, we'll say, you know what, stay in your marriage, be Muslim. Down the road, inshallah, she'll have her iman stronger to either leave the marriage and sacrifice it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is not to say that the marriage is permissible, but this is to say kufr is a bigger sin. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. To say kufr is a bigger sin. We wouldn't say, oh, that's it, stay in kufr. No, we wouldn't say stay in kufr. We would say, inshallah, you'll take your baby steps, grow in your Islam to probably make those choices and sacrifices for the sake of Allah. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Of course. We'll stay in, become Muslim. Become Muslim. Get yourself out of Jahannam. Get yourself out of Jahannam. Inshallah, you'll grow in your iman to be able to make those strong decisions. Right now, of course, she's just a revert, maybe a year, maybe a few months. We'll say, get out of Jahannam at least. Stay in this marriage. If you can't yet make those big decisions.
I don't know if I misheard this, but was there ever a Sahaba, like when Islam was being introduced, like there was a woman who converted and her husband converted just for the sake of their marriage?
Are you talking about Talha? Talha didn't. No, you're probably talking about Zainab, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. So Zainab, no. Zainab, her husband did actually convert to Islam and wholeheartedly, and it wasn't because to save the marriage. If you're talking about Al-As ibn al-Rabi', it wasn't for that. And if you're talking about Talha, when he got married to Haram, she basically said, hey, you've got all the good qualities that any woman would want. If only you would become Muslim, I would get married to you. And he later was like, you know what? I'm going to become Muslim, and got married to her. But he was actually, Talha later was actually one of those to defend the Prophet ﷺ. So his Islam wasn't to get married to this beautiful woman, but he actually was committed to his Islam. All right. So it wasn't, some guy that was, all right, I'll just get married, pretend to be Muslim. No, they were committed. They were committed. Go ahead, my dear.
So if the man, like, you know how like the man is allowed to get married to a woman who's not a Muslim?
Yeah, I can hear you, my dear.
So I'm not getting married. Is the woman supposed to like convert to being a believer? Like, how is that supposed to go?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you say, ladies, can you just hold on, please. Go ahead.
So like when the man get married, like marries the non-believer, is he like supposed to convince her to like become a Muslim?
Is the man, if he were to marry a Christian or a Jewish woman, is he supposed to convince her to become Muslim? Well, I hope they are having conversations about all the different details. I hope he's also having a conversation about what matters the most, which is Islam. Right? They're having all these conversations about the right foods to cook and where to I guess, put the couch in, they didn't have the time to actually talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that a Muslim is always supposed to do the da'wah to the person that they would find on the street, let alone a person who he's sharing bed with. Of course he has to invite her to Islam. Of course such a conversation is always supposed to happen. Right?
Would he stay with her if she doesn't convert, like ever? Or like for a
If she's
long
Christian
time?
or a Jew, he can stay with her as long as she's not muhariba, as long as she's not a combatant against Islam, he can stay with her. And as long as she's afifa, as a bashful woman, he can stay with her.
What does
Even if she,
what does a bashful woman mean in this context of this verse?
fair enough, a bashful actually means she doesn't date anyone
Okay.
other than her husband.
Okay.
She's committed to this marriage. She's not cheating behind his back. She's a woman that, she's not somehow, dressing in a way to seduce other people, inviting other people, but she's dressing to a certain level of modesty, to a certain level of maintaining relationship that is really to show commitment to her husband. So that's what it means to be committed. She's not having multiple boyfriends and one day she's with this guy and the other day she's with that guy, and in that situation, that's not a bashful woman. All right?
Can you go over the class hours and times?
That's a good one because I'm lost. Do we want, I myself am lost.
Yeah.
Do we want to do Saturday at 6? No. Hold on. If you want Saturday at 6, raise your hand.
Tomorrow though. Oh, Saturday instead of Friday?
No, plus Saturday because I'm leaving the US.
Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday.
No way.
Yes, I'm leaving the US. We already booked our ticket December 25th. We're right now November 10th. So the passports arrived. Yep, the passports arrived and we booked the tickets. So December 25th is when we're leaving, inshallah. All right. What was that? Who knows when? Hashtag Hijrah. There you go. Hashtag Hijrah. So we did book our tickets. I will be inshallah online, yet I don't know exactly when, we're going to be, I guess, moving from one place to another till we figure ourselves out. So we're going to have a time lapse of probably a month or so trying to figure ourselves out. Do you want how many people want a class tomorrow? Only one is right. Plus Saturday. So Wednesday, Friday, plus Saturday.
Yeah.
Can we do
That's too much?
How about Sunday?
How about Sunday? He says.
Sunday may be better because Saturday there's a halaqah for Masjid Taqwa.
Okay.
Sunday.
So let's just leave Wednesday and Friday then. Let's leave Wednesday and Friday then. And I'll put a poll to see another day. All right? Inshallah. What was that? So it's at 6. So this is it. Inshallah, we'll see you all next week. I will put up, inshallah.
Is there the QR code for the group?
There is a QR code. Here we go. This is a QR code. Yeah, you just scan it.
So Dr. Aysha, how are you? How's the family? How's everybody?
Oh, alhamdulillah. The pediatrician's name is Hatim Al-Haj. He's a pediatrician. So
I tried
Hatim,
to listen him one day.
he's
I
what?
couldn't understand.
Really?
His
Why?
English, oh my God.
His
I'm like,
English is
I'm
not
like,
good
what's
or
he
good?
talking, huh?
Is it
Like
good?
big vocabulary.
Big
like,
vocabulary? Okay.
no, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay.
So Dr. Aysha, how's everything? How's
Alhamdulillah.
Palestine?
Palestine,
Yeah, we are. I'm doing it.
The situation is really sad. Make dua. So this is it, everybody. We'll see you all inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.